So, um, I wanted to share a conversation you and I had um, in the realm of pairing and detection. And it was, as many people know, I'm a strong advocate for the delayed conditioning with stimulus first, and then while they're in stimulus, reward happens. But we had a really good conversation about some pros and cons when it comes to the use of pairing and how it can address one of the common problems that we see in detection, which is a dog being committed to odor, a dog having more duration at odor. Um, and we were kind of going with there's a recipe here somewhere where we can do the pairing, but then there's the common issues we see that also come with pairing, which
Right.
was dogs too active, aggressing, or only looking for, or primarily looking for that
Right.
reward item. So, kind of elaborate with me what your feelings were about that,
Yeah.
and then we'll kind of go from there.
So I've been thinking a lot lately about there are a lot of different. We say it all the time. There are a lot of different ways to get to the end result, right? And they've all shown to be functional. So if you take any kind of approach to training that is popular and maintains popularity, it's because it works, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's identifying the strengths and the weaknesses. And is there a way that we can take the best part of pairing and the best parts of delayed conditioning and put them together so that we avoid the pitfalls that we see, the things that we know are potentially problems. So with pairing, we talked about it, aggressive alerts, so like dogs wanting to interact with odor because the reward system's in there, especially for highly motivated dogs. Some blocking effects, right? You don't know if the dog's necessarily paying attention to the odor. Is it being overridden by their desire? Benefits of pairing, right? Are the benefits of pairing are really good search behavior right away, right?
Yep.
And the dog's using their nose more vigorously when they first interact with odor. So the first time you put odor in with it, you've been doing primary hunts for food or toys. And then when you put odor in with it, the dogs are already hunting and using their nose. And the issues that I felt that I saw with pairing a lot were the people that have been doing it for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Now we know the benefit of delayed conditioning, right, is much less likely to have any kind of aggressive behavior generated towards odor, and no blocking effects, right? You know that the odor right from the beginning is predicting reward. So the dog typically makes a connection with pure odor, like sooner. So can we get both of those? And so for me, I began to think, and the downside of delayed conditioning that I've witnessed recently, the things that I've seen, is frequently for dogs that have a lot of training already, have obedience training, or some breeds that are maybe a little more visual, or like I was running one of my young dogs through, and she wasn't even using her nose in the early stages. She got near the box, got in there, got rewarded, and then she was offering all kinds of operant behavior around the box without even registering the odor. She was sometimes not even sniffing. Like she's like, "Oh, you want me to touch that box? Or you want me to hover my head in that box? You want me to touch the side of it or whatever it was?" And so I was like, "Okay, how could I get her into kind of hunt mode?" And then I've also seen dogs stick and not want to start to search off of the box, right? Getting those initial moving out and searching a space. So that's usually pretty easy with pairing and with the pairing stuff. So I just, like, me not being an expert on this at all, just kind of sitting back and watching and recognizing the things that would be difficult and the things that would potentially be useful. I'm like, well, what if we started out with, especially with a certain type of dog, and did a half a dozen, I mean, just throwing a random number out there, half a dozen sessions of pairing, and then immediately put odor out, like after that, and then followed basically the delayed conditioning procedures after that. And would we have more success with a wider range of dogs? And is there some way we can limit the amount of time we use pairing so that we don't get all those the bad stuff that we have, and gain the hunting, the use of nose benefits of it, and then quickly switch over to odor by itself and see how it goes.
Yeah. When Natalie and I were talking, I was saying kind of like, it to me, it's now evolving for me after 20-something years of pairing. And then going, ooh, I see delayed conditioning. I saw tons of benefits to that. To now, after probably about 5 or 6 years of doing the delayed conditioning, kind of saying what you just said there, I think it's a recipe. I think it's both it's the right mix of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, depending on that dog in front of me.
I think depending on the dog is the appropriate thing. Right?
Yeah.
I think you said that because there's some dogs that just sail through the delayed conditioning, right? And then you're great. Like if the dog latches onto that and they obviously recognize odor and they are natural hunters and they don't have any problem moving on and starting to hunt, awesome.
And I
great.
think that that's like, because you're coming at it and seeing like Dora works through some of that with a dog that already has, kind of a big training history. And a lot of my perspective, kind of now having, trained and raised more dogs is I'm always starting from the beginning and before they have like a lot of this other stuff. So, pairing didn't really fit into, like needing that tool because like I already have, like they're getting it from the beginning. And so, but it does make sense, when we think about dogs that have all these other ideas about how to problem solve, and like olfaction is not necessarily the first thing that they think about.
Right.
And how can we reach those dogs? And, one thing that I'm not, I started out in pairing because I did, the very popular kind of sport system and very quickly went, I want behaviors and like I want more intensity. And so switched to delayed conditioning and using markers and all of that. And then really kind of, still have, and I think Cameron does to a degree also, like we have kind of an emotional, block for ourselves to be like, that's, we like this and the markers and all of that. And also needing to kind of defend the use of that makes you a little bit stronger towards that. So it's helpful to have somebody outside of that and obviously a trainer that we respect a ton to say, maybe that is, and I know Cameron was stronger leaning that way than I was. That, hey, there could be some benefit for certain dogs. And I've certainly, I work with lots and lots of sport students that do pairing and maybe use me for this or that. But like they started in pairing and their main trainer, that they go to weekly classes with is pairing. And obviously it does work. Like people have success. There's dogs that, get to really high levels doing it. And also maybe with some of the lower drive dogs, you're not at heavy risk of some of the bigger fallout, like the aggressing at odor. And, those dogs already have pretty decent hunt drive. You're not needing to manufacture it as much. But it's an interesting concept to think about. And I know for me, right now is a cool time to think about sort of different ways to do things because I'm already sort of in the next iteration of how I think about developing a dog with my puppy. So it could be fun to play around with and see what it can give and sort of where that ground is to say like, okay, that's enough of that. We don't need any more of that. Or, it's interesting.
I think that to do delayed conditioning, you have to be using markers.
Yeah.
But to be doing pairing, it's not. You can do that with markers too. Like, so people may not be doing it, but absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason that I couldn't have the odor and the primary in a container of some
that's
kind.
what we were kind of.
That the animal comes, and when they're in odor, I mark before I open and give them access, right?
That's exactly what we were talking about.
So I would build my marker in right from the beginning. They don't just get to go free access.
Yeah.
And so if I were going to do this outside of the very early food or toy only hunts, as soon as I started pairing it with odor, I wouldn't allow them to directly.
Self-reward.
This is the way I'm thinking of it right now.
Yeah.
Like,
that's kind of we were on the same
I wouldn't let
thought
them just go in and get
right.
it. I would set up containers that had a gap so they could scent it, but they can't push in easily. But I can open the container, and they have to stop. They have to hold themselves for a second, just like showing me, hey, I'm here. I mark, and then I open to give them access, right?
And I think kind of the cool thing about that idea is, like you're introducing the concept right away that like you still need me for this.
Yes.
Like, yeah, it's there, but you still need to bring me into this so that I can help you access the reward, which is kind of part of what delayed conditioning
Well,
is.
there's some risk too. So how it inspired me was I was watching my dogs play, and when the ball or an object went behind a barrier of some sort. So, for example, they had this little bone thing in the house the dogs played with, and the bone itself, initially an old nylon bone, didn't have any value to it, but it rolled underneath the sofa, and both dogs were adamant, like, there's a thing here, I want the thing. And I looked at that and said, okay, that's a very easy behavior. I think a lot of people know when their dogs are communicating to them that they want something, like whether it be a treat in a cabinet or to go outside or whatever it is. But the higher value the thing is, the more adamant the behavior to tell you it's here is. And I wanted to capture that in detection because that addressed one of the bigger issues that existed, which is dog commitment to odor and the handler knowing that. So that was that first step for me to go, okay, how can I do that? And the only way I really knew was from the pairing side of it, where the dogs, when they had either been paired enough or had assumed that the odor really did lead to a reward, they were better about telling you it was there in some cases. But then the discussion turned into the problems that came from that, which was in my experience after 20 years of doing it that way, was we did it too long that way. And that was a bigger thing to kind of deal with, was we did it for too long where it was constantly, it was pair for, let's just say, 100 or more reps. And depending on the dog's motivation, we dealt with blowback of aggressive and odor, dogs, any level of persistence, biting, scratching, etc. All those active things towards odor was a problem. And then the other part was the dog looking for the reward item? Was the dog really looking for odor? That was the other part of it. So then the conversation kind of evolved from there as we were talking. And my thought was, okay, depending on the dog, of course, I would take maybe the first 2 or 3 reps when I'm associating odor to the odor, but the volume of odor is really strong in comparison to that reinforcement item. So instead of having an entire, let's say, Kong and the odor, let's say I have a 2 or 3 Q-tips of, let's say, whether it's essential oil or a narcotic or explosive, that's whatever size. But instead of having the whole Kong going down to a smaller piece of a Kong or a smaller piece of tennis ball or a smaller piece of food. So that way I had the volume of odor higher than the volume of the reinforcing item that's been associated with such pleasure. And could that connection be enough?
Could that make it smoother? With less of the fault there? Yeah.
So
I mean, I think the goal would have to be to get the dogs searching for odor in isolation as quickly as you can, right? But to me, it parallels the difference between like lured behaviors and free shaping behaviors, right? You can get there both ways with those things. And what are the pitfalls, right, with that? Like frustration, lack of connection sometimes with free shaping and that kind of thing, because the dogs are trying different things and my timing's off a little. They're not figuring out what I want them to figure out. There's all the difficulties that come with that, but they get there and they're very active in the process. And then what's the downside of luring? Fading, the help, right? So I just look at pairing like help. Like it's the equivalent of luring, and your delayed conditioning is the equivalent of shaping, right? And as somebody that is used to using systems that have mechanical help built in and then having to eliminate that help, it's just a part of the process. But you have to let people know, and anytime you do it too long and you're not good about your fading, you get stuck and it can get hard, right? And I'm sure that people that do pairing for extended periods of time have a really hard time getting off of it at a certain point, right? So where's that sweet spot? And does a dog need it? And if they don't need it, great. Like you can goof around. You could even goof around a little bit with both, right? I could start messing with delayed, and if the dog wasn't showing the behavior that I wanted, like I've watched some of your dogs like just like blast through it. Like okay, they got that really fast. Like no problem. Cool. Then is there any benefit to me going back and pairing with that dog? Maybe not. But if the dogs are maybe not so much, or I get a feel that that dog is too operant around the box or whatever it is, they're offering behavior instead of using their nose, then why not do a number of sessions of pairing and see what happens?
I mean, to me, the recipe of this pairing and delayed conditioning aspect is that dog. So if I have a lower motivated dog, that pairing sequence might go longer, or the volume of odor of the reinforcing item is maybe more than another dog would have. And to have that flexibility as a trainer to be able to go, okay, we're going to start off pairing for this dog, 3 reps, and then we're going to do 1 or 2 reps without any primary
kind of
reps to it.
assess.
Yeah, exactly. And then this other dog, though, we also may need to do more reps, and we need higher volume of reinforcement odor with that.
Oh, like mess with that.
Yeah, because we're playing with 2 things and determining what makes the best connection. Versus way it's been in detection was it's always just been this one recipe for every dog. It's like
of course.
the one box with a toy in it, with the food in it, or whatever that system was. But that was what was the trainer would use, that one system for every dog, which is why, in my opinion, we saw inconsistencies throughout.
Sure.
Versus now myself looking at it going, okay, each dog we bring into the detection dog school and we're training with, we're going to do an evaluation. What do they like? What do they love? The hierarchy of reward. And then go, okay, and we've done our developmental stage of playing and searching for their primary reward first. And then seeing, okay, they got some good search skills. They understand the concept. Okay, now let's go to odor. Okay, and in that developmental stage, we're able to get the journal I want of that dog. Like, what's its motivation level like? What's its persistence like naturally? How much is the search frequency?
Right.
Does it look for human help a lot? And that will guide, okay, the very first session we play this game and we put odor with it, we do the pairing part, I can have a better idea how much reward or how much primary odor I use with the target odor.
Right.
And then being willing to adjust accordingly. And the part I like too is, as it progresses in training, at any point in time, I can do a pairing type exercise search. I can randomly have either a small amount of reward item in the odor with the odor, but also making sure I'm proofing it as a separate.
Yeah.
So to the dog through the training system, in order to really pay attention to it, once it's learned this game, it only can pay attention to the reward item when target odor is there.
Yeah, and dogs definitely figure that out because, on the sport side where pairing is heavily used and in some cases used for the career of the dog and they really never fully phase it out, the dog does learn that if there's a distraction or whatever and I don't smell odor with it, I'm not supposed to pay attention to that, and people say they have a lot of success with that. I haven't.
Natalie's skeptical face. She's like,
I haven't seen enough dogs to be like, oh, they all totally understand that, because I think there are dogs that are going to constantly be in a big conflict with that and say like, well, geez. And also something I was thinking about after we were talking about this is kind of struggling with. So there are some professional dogs that need to search in areas where their odor may be right next to food that they cannot eat. And how would this impact them, or what would we see with that? I mean, maybe it would make them way better. I don't know. Like,
my hunch is that the usefulness of it is going to be short-lived.
Yeah.
And you want to be off it.
Yep.
It's a developmental.
It's a developmental piece, and then you would not go back to pairing or any of that kind of stuff unless you'd really broken things somehow, right?
I say there's some kind of issue that shows itself.
And I would try to eliminate it as quickly as I could, just like I do with any help. Like it's a risk of any kind of dog training. You help for longer than you need to, and then you have a harder time. So getting off of it would be key. My hunch is that maybe in the hunt development stage, you're going to see the dogs that maybe would do better with delayed, and those that would do better. So I think a dog that had really strong natural hunt drive, that really likes to search, like some of the spaniels you guys have, that just like they hunt like little maniacs from the beginning, and they like to hunt, then those dogs, I might go straight to delayed conditioning with them. Yeah. But a lot of the herder types, we got Malinois, we got Border Collies, we got other dogs like that, they'll all search, but as I'm doing search development, like you're hunting for your toy, you're doing food hunts or whatever, if they're not as natural at the searching, then I like the fact that when you're when you're going, it's a nice transition. You're hunting
Right,
for
right.
your object. Now you're hunting for your object with odor, and you keep the search behavior alive in them. The fact that they're using their nose and they're working, and they don't kick over into some kind of obedience mode. And then once the connection's made, pull it out as quickly as you can.
Yep.
Yeah, and then it would kind of let you, because obviously there's downsides to like staying on primary hunting for too long, which is maybe what you would be tempted to do with those type of dogs.
Exactly.
But then you could have that transition of odor without sort of the maybe as much of the downside of just that primary hunt. So it's kind of like a training wheel step that those dogs get versus dogs that, you know, kind of understand hunting innately or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept for sure. There was another point that I was thinking about, but then I went on a different track.
Of course,
so it may come back.
routinely in these kinds of discussions. Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity for people to listen to trainers talking to each other, in weighing out pros and cons, versus being the way we've kind of been. No matter where you're at in the industry, it's kind of like you're on one side of the equation or the other. They're like, here's a line in the sand, and we're this or that.
Yeah.
And I've always internally disagreed with that, even though at times I've not been the best proponent of that. I've been, this is the way to go. Through the years and traveling with a lot of different dog teams and seeing dogs from around the world that share pretty much a lot of the same issues, but at the same time, the techniques I needed to use in those seminar formats, I had to figure things out and be willing to get outside of my comfort zone or the things that I really felt strongly about and find what worked for that team.
Yeah.
And when I was able to do that, that made a bigger difference. And it opened my eyes up a little bit further to like, hey, I don't need to throw the baby out in the bathwater with my old thought process of pairing was so bad because I had gone through all the bad sides of it. And so I could say as a trainer, oh, well, I don't like it because, and here I have 20 years of history behind it. But then I also knew there was a lot of things like you talked about that I liked about it. And
there's certainly loads of good search dogs out there that were trained that way, right?
Yeah,
like they got there, right? The dogs are searching their
plenty of handlers that will tell you how well it works. And I don't discredit or don't disagree with that. I think it is true. I guess needed to it helped me recenter as a trainer that I want all the options and tools available to me,
of course,
for the team. And then because like Natalie said, she was very passionate about not going to pairing because of her experience up to this point.
Sure.
But as the conversation, as we just had, kind of got you to rethink where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think like some of my emotional reaction to it or is because I see it used a lot. No, I don't want to say like lazy training, but I see it used a lot as a Band-Aid where it's like creating this better hunt drive and it looks nicer, but you're not really, if you just keep going back to that and then you stop pairing and then it like falls apart again and then like
not addressing the problem.
You're not addressing the problem, and I don't like the idea of something like that being used in an unhelpful way. It would be like having an obedience behavior that like only works when you lure it. Like, well, then you don't ever really have the behavior, and at a certain point you have to say, I need to address something else. There's something else here that needs to be looked at. And so I've just seen it used a lot like that. And so I think for me, that's kind of part of, you know, part of that pushback.
And I think that you've been now really leaning hard into the delayed conditioning for 5 years or however long it's been now, right? And so you've run up against the kinds of difficulties that are going to present themselves. You figured out how to work around them, right? And it's the same with the stuff if you know the benefits of pairing and you've worked through that and you know the difficulties you're going to run up against, you've learned how to work around them. Okay, so now how do we borrow from both buckets, right?
Yeah.
And say, and how do we get the best parts of both of those things,
right.
you know? And that's kind of what my interest is at this stage of my career is like, okay, there's all these dog training methodologies that are around, and they're around for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? If they're still here, they're around for a reason, right? Outside of bad dog training, right? And that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They're effective with the right dog, the right path, a trainer that knows how to execute them and knows what those pitfalls are.
Right.
So if we can talk about all the techniques and their strengths and their weaknesses honestly, instead of trying to sell a system, right? You know, this idea that there's a system to training. It's like, no, we understand underlying governing principles, right? And then we can adjust them a little bit to the dog that's in front of us to get the best out of all of them would be the goal, right?
And I think with being that way, that new person coming into, let's say in this case detection, getting their footing on what do I like, who do I trust, what do I follow? There's all this information out there, but then there's so much passion behind a method or another method. So that was the other part that was the struggle for me, was like, okay, how do I help that person out without alienating or making them feel they had to alienate one system or another because of the passion behind whether it be my style of training, I would call it, or somebody else's, their version when they talk to somebody else, like, well, this is the way we do it. And again, accomplishing the number one goal for me, which was, how do I solve the main problem we see everywhere we go with detections, which was that good, strong commitment to odor, but also manage the arousal levels of dogs. So whether it be the really high aroused dog who is too aggressive at source, to the dog who's not motivated enough. And it truly kind of fell to me as it's a mixture of these things. And with this dog, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. With the other one, it's a lot of this and a little of that. And I needed to kind of process that, how to think my way through it as a trainer, and then how to best incorporate it. And it comes through having peers you can talk to and discuss, hey, I'm having this idea, tell me what you think. And then go from there. So that's kind of how we did that. So
it also maybe might come down to the fact that it's like, what types of problems are you the most comfortable working through? Like, so there's certain types of physical ways of interacting with a dog that's going to be easy for one person and not so easy for another person, right? And do the choices, the methodologies we're picking, align with the handler's strengths, right?
That's like
that's another conversation right there.
Right. So there's a thing that, like, is there a best way, or is there a best way for an entire team?
That's
right. And so maybe there's a type of, like with luring, for instance, and obedience, like, I'm super comfortable with the process of fading it. Like, I've done it all for years. I know I'm very comfortable with up its against. I know what it looks like when I'm getting stuck, and I've come up with all the little workarounds for when you get stuck, right? So it's no big deal. But for somebody else, that might be really hard. Physically, that's not the way they operate. And so, like, a shaping approach might be way better for them
because they're going to run into that issue and then be really
and then maybe it feels better for them to try to resolve it in a system of shaping where their timing is right, but maybe the physicality of it isn't there for them. And that, I would assume this is going to be the same thing for this section, right?
I definitely think that's the case. You know, I guess the hope is, because I do think the way that sort of the detection world is on the sports side and the professional side is you're one or the other, and so not a lot of people are really doing this mix and match kind of thing. And so when you get a new student in, or when somebody's first starting, it's like they're kind of picking what tribe they're going to go with, you know? And then I would say, and I think that you would probably agree, as far as the handler part, at least looking at our sort of non-trainer, you know, people getting into a sport for the first time, which is what a lot of sport nosework people are, pairing is hands down the easy way to go. Like, the dog starts picking it up, you're starting to do searches pretty quickly, you don't need all of these great mechanics necessarily right in the beginning.
Dogs with less motivation,
right?
You don't have that intermediate step, right? That's a really interesting concept for me, because I've noticed it in obedience, right? We were talking about it the other day about the send away exercise in obedience, right? And so, do I send my dog directly to the primary, or do I send my dog out to touch a target to get the primary? And it takes a different dog to do the second one. If you put a step between the dog and the reward, like, I have to search for odor to get my reward versus I'm searching directly for my reward, then that takes more dog. It takes a dog that's wired a certain way, and they need more general motivation because they have one extra step between them and what they want, right? And so if somebody's coming with a pretty low drive dog, maybe starting out with pairing's the better way because they're successful more early. And then as it builds in, you pull it out, right? That's the other thing. So I come up with some super motivated dog that sign tracks really well. Like, we have dogs that'll run, 100 meters to go touch a foot target to get a toy. Like, those dogs, there's that kind of dog that are going to make those other delayed conditioning connections super quickly. And that's always fascinating too.
I totally agree. Well, we just wanted to use this opportunity to share, us as trainers talking and discussing our way through something that we see in the dog world, and through that conversation being open to all things could be on the table for us to get the job accomplished, not the othering of you're this or you're that. And I hope that those that are new to this can realize, depending on who you're talking to, that both sides could be correct in what they're offering and what they're seeing in that moment. And the trainer you want to work with has the goal of what's best for you and your dog in mind versus their method or methodology. So this is something I want to share with you guys, and Natalie's alarm went off, which meant it's time for us to end. So we will talk to you guys in the next one.